So yeah, so I get to do host, I get to do producing, and I get to present. So I'm not sure that's a good thing or a bad thing.
I had that spin in November. So host, produce, and gave a session. So congratulations, my
Hey,
friend. It's your turn.
and you're doing a session two today too, right?
Well, gosh, I did. I hosted a couple panel discussions. You're right.
It's all good.
Oh my gosh. So, gosh, Javier, you're going to be talking about MS Graph.
Yep, and
And
Microsoft Identity and Azure AD. So it's something fun that I've been playing around for a while with different identity components and different identity solutions. So I figured, hey, let's put something together. I reached out to my friends at the Microsoft Identity team on Azure, and it's like, hey, what do you have to show
yeah,
that we can kind of bring together on desktop applications? Because typically I'm an ASP.NET developer, so I wanted to show something on the desktop instead. So
yeah, there's definitely something where back in the day, before the cloud, you had all Active Directory locally, and it was easy. You
right,
just opened up and you were signed in, and away you
right,
went. So I'm interesting to learn. I'm interested in learning more from you on this approach with Azure AD.
yeah, we'll go a little bit here. So perfect.
Alrighty, take it away, my friend.
Thank you. All right, now where did my mouse go? I've lost my mouse. Oh, there it is. Add to streams. So again, hey everybody, welcome. My name is Javier Lozano, and we are going to be doing a presentation today on Windows, bringing desktop apps to the cloud with Azure and MS Graph. Now, the MS Graph piece is going to be fairly small. It's just kind of mostly there to kind of show you that you can do something with MS Graph or an API. The main gist of this is essentially kind of showing you what the capabilities are there right now for your application. Now, the mileage will vary. The demos that I have are very specific, very contrived, just because of, like I said, your app might be doing different things. It might be reading from a disk, it might be calling a database, it might be doing a lot of other different components that these apps will do. So hopefully with this, with these demos, and shows you, hey, here's what's available for me, and here's what I can do to enable my applications to be more successful. All right, so let's get going here. All right, next slide. So a little bit about myself. I am an MVP on developer technologies. I've been so for, I don't know, so many 15 or plus years. I'm also a board member of the .NET Foundation. So it's fun because I get to kind of in the background work with the foundation and making these projects successful, and also get to sponsor .NET Conf. So I get to run it and sponsor it. So it's kind of an interesting approach, and I hope that all of you enjoy it. I run a small company out of Des Moines, Iowa, cleverly called Lozano Tech, and down is my Twitter handle and my email. So if you have any questions, tweet me or email me, and we can kind of go through it. That's about it. All right. So this is an interesting slide because we've all written applications where we store user passwords, right? Whether we use ASP.NET Identity, or we roll our own, or we're using a third-party thing, we all want to store our passwords. But the problem with passwords is that even the big people get it wrong. Well, what does that mean? It means that sometimes the passwords are stored unencrypted, or the salt for hashing the passwords is readily available. There's just so much risk there. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying that when you opt to do that, your risk goes up, right? So you always have to be 1 or 5 steps ahead of everybody else. Now, one of the things that I'm showing in the slide is I'm showing statistics from the HaveIBeenPwned.com website by our dear friend Troy Hunt from a couple days ago. So out of this, there's been 507 pawn websites with over, what was that? That is 10 billion accounts out there, and from paste and from paste accounts. So there's, even the big people out there working on these problems have issues. And I'm not saying that that's bad. It's just that authentication and encryption and all these things is difficult. So when you opt to do that, you're bringing all that risk into your application. Now, there's ways you can mitigate that, and that one way is by using a third-party tool such as Active Directory. Now, Active Directory, as you can see, is the world's largest cloud identity service. The most important thing is the lower right-hand side, where there are over 30 billion, that is with a capital B, daily authentication requests that happen in Azure AD. That is across the entire Azure cloud. Now, there are over 200,000 premium organizations. That essentially is just the size of the Azure AD and the features that you have available, monthly users and so forth. But the interesting thing is that there are 30 billion authentications that happen daily, whether it be via your mobile device, whether it be application, whether it be your desktop app, whatever. All those authentication requests are going through Azure AD, and it's handling and scaling across um, um, the Azure cloud. Now, why do we want to look at something like Azure AD? Well, the reason why we want to do that is because more often than not, as Jeff was mentioning earlier, is like, hey, back in the day, you just created a Windows app and you run it and it runs into the context of the user. Well, why is the value of that? Well, the reason why we want to do that is because we're leveraging existing solution, right? We have our IT department who says, no, everything must be in AD. Everything needs to be in an OU, or it needs to be a user, or whatever. That structure has been set by us, so we kind of have to adhere to it. Not saying that that's bad, it's just that it's easier to manage, right? The risk is mitigated and people understand what's available and what's not available to them. So the nice thing about it is that we can also enable applications quickly into our system. And we can then be able to use the tools that we know and the languages that we know to be able to provide some of the out of the box capabilities. So I can use my C# knowledge, I can use my VB.NET knowledge, my .NET knowledge, and bring that, or my Java knowledge, right? And actually bring it all together. All right, so let's talk about what are some of the features of it. Is that, like I mentioned before, there's 30 billion authentication requests. That reduces the sign-in friction, right? We have the ability to able to easily sign into your application by making a simple request using the libraries that Microsoft provides to be able to say, hey, I am user so-and-so, I need to authenticate, get me information back about that. And we'll examine that here when we do the demo. Also, the thing about it is that I can also customize applications and be able to secure them differently. What does that mean? Is that I can take my own custom web APIs or apps and saying, hey, this is secured by Azure AD, or my Office 365 instance, essentially, which is front-ended by Microsoft Graph, is also protected by Azure AD. So when I make a call and I want to get information, or I want to create whatever event or whatever on the cloud, all of it is managed by Azure AD, and it's all easily accessible via these libraries. And obviously, we're complying with IT, as I mentioned before. There's significant investment. They're always getting audited. Back in the day when I had when I worked for a company, I lived in audits, and I will tell you that that is a life I don't no longer want, because of just all the minutia that we had to go through and prove that yes, this access was valid and here's why it happened. And there's a lot of stuff in there. And now with something like Azure AD and the identity platform, I can actually run a request and run a report and provide all that rather than trying to aggregate all that data together. And obviously, we can actually provide safeguard and authorization and authentication to all the users that are out there in my organization. So what does the Microsoft Identity Platform look like for developers? First of all, we have the ability to register an application, which is important. We want to be able to say, hey, application XYZ, I wanted to register with the Azure portal or the Microsoft Graph API. That means that this application is requesting access, right, to be able to get information and be able to, quote unquote, trust it from the Microsoft identity. This way, when I make a call and I say, hey, I'm logging in with this Microsoft account or this domain account or enterprise account, it actually knows that, yep, this is Javier's desktop app or Javier's web application requesting out there and having the ability to make that request. Now, with all of this, the work actually gets a lot simpler by using something called the Microsoft Authentication Libraries, or MSAL, right? So that allows you to have clients and services. Well, what does that mean? A client is my desktop app, right? It's my desktop application that says, hey, I am going to go authenticate against the Azure cloud. I'm going to get information about Javier. I'm going to store that locally. And then I'm going to call a service, whether it be the Microsoft Graph or maybe a custom endpoint on my own API, to be able to pass that information and be able to trust that information and knowing that, yes, it is Javier's application who made this call, who has information about the context. And obviously, we have endpoints. We have OIDC, which stands for OpenID Connect. OpenID Connect in the past, I would say, 10 years has grown significantly from just OpenID to OpenID Connect. OpenID Connect provides also profile information for users. It's built on top of OAuth, so it's not like you're learning different protocols. As the moment you learn OAuth and you understand what that provides, and you learn OpenID Connect, you're sort of building on top of each other, right? And you have all this knowledge set above it. Like I said, you can also add web APIs, whether you're custom ones or anything that's supposed to around Azure. You can easily secure those applications. Now, what identities or endpoints can I use with the Microsoft Identity platform? I have Azure AD. Typically, this is your organization account, whether it be a work or school account. Sometimes when you log in with with your Microsoft account somewhere, it asks you, is this a work and school account or is this a personal account? A personal account is your MSA or Microsoft account. That is back in the day when it was called Passport and everything has evolved. Now it's obviously called Microsoft account, and it's completely different than an Azure AD account. Now, the reason why they're different is because the Microsoft account is not managed by Azure AD. Technically, it is behind the scenes, but it's actually specifically to an individual, not to an organization, like an Azure AD account. Then we also have the ability to add external identities, right? So that is your Facebook, that is your Google, that is your Twitter, if you want to, as a part of Azure B2C. As you can see, I did not mean to rhyme, there is a lot of TLA's information about it. B2C stands for business to consumer, right? So that means that is a third-party third-party identity or account, such as my Facebook, that is now being granted access or being linked with something in Azure AD to be able to say, yep, I'm going to Facebook, I'm authenticating in Facebook, I'm coming back to my application, and then Azure needs to know a little about it to be able to say, yes, Javier's Facebook account is this account, which then I can then relay back to the application. Now, all of this happens with the usage of industry standards and or protocols. So we have OAuth 2, we have OpenID Connect, we have SAML, and we have SCIM. So now what this means that you don't have to learn all those protocols. You can use the libraries and you can use the flows that are defined by you by Azure to be able to leverage those. However, that does not excuse you from not understanding the protocol. You should always learn the protocol to understand what capabilities are there and how the Microsoft Identity Platform is leveraging those features that the protocol provides. Okay. All right, so a little bit Kurt Cobain here. Come as you are. The Microsoft Identity Platform is allowed to bring your own platforms and services and take advantage of what's available out there. So what does that mean? It means that you can use whatever tool that you may have. You can have Bitbucket, you can have IntelliJ, you can have PyCharm. You can use it, leverage this on any cloud. If I deploy to AWS or DigitalOcean or GCP, it's all out there. If I use my application in Java and I need to use an identity provider that is the Azure AD, it can easily leverage it. It's all, again, talking the same protocol, the same standards. So it doesn't matter what you bring, right? But if you don't care about those other tools because you're a .NET shop and you're working on with everything with Microsoft, you have the love of GitHub and Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. It all works seamlessly. You have the Microsoft 365 platform and then the Azure services. Remember, 365 is running on top of Azure. So it's literally leveraging all the same resources behind the scenes to make it powerful. And obviously you have the Power Platform with Power Automate, Power Apps, which all can leverage those services. All right, so like as mentioned before, the main features that are available out there is single sign-on with OpenID Connect and OAuth. So OpenID Connect, again, is for getting profile information. OAuth is mostly for getting exchanging claims around the flow and scopes. You put them together and they work seamlessly. We obviously have SAML integration for applications that are, I would say, older, and I'll use air quotes around that support more of I was going to say legacy way of integrating. Not saying that SAML is not bad and it's no longer used, but it's just a different way of authenticating. It's a different protocol, but which was ahead and provided a lot of the landing path for what OpenID Connect and OAuth enabled. And obviously, we have the ability to to do also mobile SSO, whether I have my mobile application and I need to authenticate, it's the same identity provider that does all the heavy lifting and work for us. All right. So as I mentioned before, you can bring in your own libraries, develop in your own language, whether it be Java, JavaScript, Python, .NET, C Sharp, it doesn't matter. All of the libraries are available out there. They're easy for you to integrate. There's specific packages that you can download and consume that you can then go in through and secure. All right. As you can see, there's a lot of marketing slides in here. So I'm kind of getting through it so we can get to the demo here in a second. So the big thing here is obviously the Microsoft Graph. So what is the Microsoft Graph? It is a ability for you to actually query your organization's data that's living on the Microsoft Cloud. Well, what does that mean? It means that you can actually take whatever you have in Office 365 and extend it. So if you want to be able to programmatically say, hey, I want an application where Jeff Fritz is actually logging in and is making a change to a document, we can actually have that on that record showing that, hey, it was Jeff who logged in, who had this access token to able to make that request. And it's all built together. So if I build apps or I build agents or whatever else that I may want to extend the Microsoft Graph or my own process flows that I may have, I can then leverage all that together and have the ability to be able to use it with the API. So obviously you have local data and you have the Azure platform. So let's do a little demo here when we show a Windows application using Azure AD and the Microsoft Graph. The one important thing here that I have, and I always mention this when I try to do an identity presentation, is that as Mr. R. Schwarzenegger has to tells us right here, is like, who is your daddy and what does he do? I love this quote from a classic movie, Kindergarten Cop, because it essentially splits us into authentication and authorization. Who is your daddy? That is authentication. What does he do? That is authorization. So let's see kind of what that looks like here in a second. All right, let me minimize this. And as you can see, I was searching for it. And let's bring up the MS Graph demo. So I have a WPF application right here. It is not the prettiest WPF application because it doesn't have to be. It is here to kind of showcase the ability to, hey, here's the different components that we have. We're going to be showing you what's available out there and how the MSAL libraries work. So I'm going to run it. We're going to start with that. We're going to see what it does. And then we're going to dissect it. So that way we can understand all the pieces that it has available to it. All right, so let's wait for here to bring up. La, la, la. Come on, you can do it. Ta-da, there we go. All right, so user has signed out. By the way, one of the things that you can do here with the MSAL, the authentication libraries, is that it allows you to pick different types of users that you can sign into Windows. For example, in here, in this demo, I can use the account that is currently signed into Windows. That is my account. So that means that it's using Windows WAM, which is Web Authentication Manager, to be able to say, hey, what's the current account that whether it be a work-related account or a Microsoft account attached to the currently authenticated user, signed-in user. So it's going to use that. Or the second one could be use any of the accounts known by Windows WAM. That means that, hey, I could have multiple accounts attached to my Windows user. Let me pick one. And then the third one is choose your own adventure. It's like, you know what? I'm going to pick whichever Windows application that I care about. Windows account that I care about. So if I pick this one and I click on this Call Microsoft Graph button, here's what happens. All of this is actually being managed by the Microsoft by MSAL libraries. So that means that I wrote zero little code to essentially say, hey, when I click this button, I need to essentially launch a web browser. This is literally a web browser running behind the scenes. If it weren't, we wouldn't see privacy and cookies listed here as a hyperlink, right? So I'm sure this is WebView or WebView 2, which we'll learn about here and later today, that it's actually hosting this and saying, hey, I need to sign in. Now, I can type in whatever Microsoft account that I have in here, or I can type in an Azure account, and it will actually go through and trigger it because essentially I'm running this on the browser. So what this means is that my desktop application using the Microsoft Authentication libraries has been able to launch a web browser to capture the context of the authentication flow. Why? because OpenID and OAuth care about exchanging of tokens around a user context. So when I authenticate, I need to be able to capture that user. I'm not going to type any users because I don't want you to see me fat finger information. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, we found this account. This account that I already have in here, that I already have connected to my Windows account. Well, where does that come from? If I click on this setting, if I go home accounts, email and accounts, look, there's my one Microsoft account and here's my other Microsoft account. So that's where they come from. So the authentication libraries are querying Windows and saying what's available there. I'm going to be using this Gmail account. So when I click on it, and it's going to go behind the scenes and it's going to do this. It's going to go and fetch information and actually get me it's going to go make an API call. This API call is to the Microsoft Graph, which we'll cover in a second. Here's my token information that I have. So it knows that is my Gmail address, and it tells me when my token is going to expire, right? I am Central Time, so it's going to expire in about an hour. So this token is only good for an hour. Well, what is a token? There's two kinds of tokens that we get. We get an ID token. An ID token essentially tells us information about it. Now, the beautiful thing about ID tokens, and actually any of the tokens that you get via via OAuth and OpenID Connect or IDC, is that they're JSON Web Tokens or JWT or JOTs, right? If you are a web developer, you probably have been working with JOTs for a while, right? Because essentially every time you call an API, you get a token from a third-party service. You always get something in this sort of context. And you may look at it as like, that looks weird. I don't understand what that is. Well, it's actually not that weird. What it is, if I copy paste this and I come to one of my favorite tools out here, which is JWT.ms, right? This is essentially a simple JSON web token parser that I can actually come over here and I can paste this and it tells me the structure of it. Now you see there's slight color coding on the token. There's some red, there's some blue, and there's some green. The red essentially is the header of the token, the blue is the body of the token, and the green is the signature of the token. Now, all of these have something specific things to do with JWT, which I will not cover here. I'm just kind of covering at a high level what the values of it are. However, the big bulk of it is that the red and the blue are base64 decoded and encoded, and I can decode them. So that essentially is just nothing but JSON. So this red value is represented here. So this web application or JavaScript application was able to decode that by saying, hey, I know the format of this. I need to just get the values of it. And here's the information that I got back. These are called claims that come in part of the token. Each of these values means something. Expiration, issued at, issuer, subject, audience, preferred username. Hey, I know that name. That's there. I know that email. I wonder where all that came from, right? And then we have the signature, which essentially is the composition of the data when using a hashing algorithm to get that data. But the cool part about it is that I can click on something like this and I can get claim information from the specific value. So for example, here, the token is known to be issued by Azure Active Directory. So here's the version of the claim type. Here's the issuer. It tells you a little more about it. Tells you the subject. It tells you the audience, the expiration, issued, the name, all these details, right, that are important for the token to be used. Now, I can come over here and I can actually grab the other token, which is the access token. The ID token just tells me of who the person is. Right? This just says, here's the person, here's Javier, here's what is available to it. The access token is the token that actually tells you information about the actual what access that individual may have. Now, and when I come in and I copy this in here, you can see that the token is actually not a JWT. It tries to decode it, but this is actually different information. So if I come back and I refresh this, because this still has the old token information, and I paste it, it knows that, hey, wait a minute, this is a different pattern. So the Graph API is actually using a different token pattern to be able to say, here's information that is important that you can send across that then I can link to saying, oh, this is Javier's token. that Javier can actually read, can write, can delete, can have whatever scope or whatever permissions that he has available to make whatever calls are there. So if I come over here, that's the information that we have. And how does it all work? So let me kill it quick. And let me bring up the code. So the way it actually works behind the scenes is that we are using the Microsoft accounts in here. For example, call graph button. The call graph button, what it does, it says, yep, here's my authentication results. These are all part of the Microsoft Identity Client namespaces. Then I'm between here, I have my WPF values in it. Here's my account. Hey, what did you select? Did you select the current sign-in Windows? Then get me the current operating system information. Nope, you selected one of them, so we got to find one. Use any account and Azure AD. Hey, we got to display the application and have this actually display the value of the currently registered apps that we have. Once it's selected, get me that one because that's the one the user wanted. Okay, so all of this essentially is just, I'm just extending what already would be there available in my apps. After that, I can say, hey, great, using that account, acquire a token silently, go make that call. Using that account, say, hey, now get me that token, get me that ID token, get me that access token. So then I can have information from it. From there, obviously, if there's some exceptions, I want to handle them. I want to be able to say, yep, hey, something happened, prompt it. I want to be able to do it again. And it all depends on essentially what error you have in here. I'm going to skip through these because they're not really relevant because we haven't had an issue yet. Once I have that token, I want to be able to take that access token and make a call to an API. That API is up here. That API is, if I keep scrolling up, it is the https graph.microsoft.com/1.0/me. That means get me information about me using that token. So now that I have an access token, I can make an API call using it and I can get data back. So the cool part about it is that, remember when I copy pasted this token over here? I can use a third-party tool like Postman to be able to go behind the scenes and say, yep, there's that MF graph, get profile. There's HTTPS graph.microsoft.com v1.0 me. I want to pass authorization. I want to pass in a bearer token. I want to pass in that token, send it. And if I give it a second here, ta-da, look, I acquired that token from my Windows application, and I'm using a totally different app to be able to get information about my identity. So this is the data that I can get back and actually store in my Windows application, know that it's Javier, know that is his principal username. Whatever other information that I may have attached to it is available there as well. All right, so that's pretty neat. You can use it that way. If you don't know which Microsoft Graph APIs might be available there, there's a great tool. It's called the Graph Explorer. And I'm going to click here, no thanks. The Microsoft Graph Explorer allows you to log in literally as that same user and be able to click here and here and say, here's my profile. Let's behind the scenes, it's running that query. Actually, I forgot I haven't authenticated yet. Come on. Oh, there it is. So let me use my password manager here, app. By the way, password manager is a great tool to use. If you haven't used one, I recommend you do. Use 1Password, which is a great tool because literally I only have to remember one password. And I can then come over here, copy it. I can paste it. Very complex password. I don't even know what it is. I don't care because my password manager manages it. And of course, I am paranoid when it comes to identity and security, some of these things, that I have MFA. So I have to go look at my Microsoft Authenticator app to be able to type in this value. So I am going to wait 10876101 and hit verify before the token times out. Yes, I beat it. Awesome. So as you can see here, literally, I authenticated the same way I authenticated in the other app. I used my username and password to get that, got the value back, and I have it right here. It's great information. You can get that. There's a lot of tools out there available. I'm actually right on time. and I want to continue working on this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to show you the link to the other demo quick. That is HTTPS lzno.tk WinApp BC2 demo. So this is literally the same application, only using Azure B2C as a third party. All right. More importantly, you want to learn more about the Microsoft Identity. I recommend you watch the 425 show. All right, at HTTPS aka.ms 425 shows every Tuesdays and Thursdays, 8 a.m., 11 a.m. Here are the different time zones. I'm actually going to be a guest next week, talking with my dear friends on the Microsoft Identity platform, talk about some of the stuff that you can do on the web and you can do in the desktop. So it's a great show. Mr. Fritz, we're out of time.
I know. What happened there?
I think we bantered too much, or I talked too much. A little bit of both.
Maybe a little bit of both. There's a couple of good questions out there, but we are out of time. Sorry about that, and we're gonna have to bump Matt Damon.
I will answer them on Twitter here.
There you go.
Perfect. Great. Well, I'm going to bring the next guest because I'm the host for the other guests.
That's right. I'll let you go. Have a good one.